What happens when a seemingly innocent reality show uncovers hidden darkness within a family? This is the shocking story of the Stockdale family, whose appearance on Wife Swap in 2008 was supposed to be a lighthearted glimpse into their conservative lifestyle. Little did anyone know that this moment of TV fame would later be tied to an unspeakable tragedy. 9 years after they welcomed cameras into their home, the Stockdales became headlines for all the wrong reasons. In 2017, 2 of the family members were found dead in a devastating incident. How did the peaceful family we saw on TV become the center of such a horrifying crime? And most importantly, what led to this shocking turn of events? Was it the pressures of their strict upbringing, or was there more lurking beneath the surface? Join us as we dive into the haunting story of the Stockdale family, exploring the events that led to a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The answers may surprise you. The Stockdale family lived a life quite different from most. They were deeply religious and valued their so-called wholesome lifestyle above all else. Kathy and Tim Stockdale were determined to protect their children from what they saw as the negative influences of the outside world. Their solution was isolating their 4 sons, Calvin, Charles, Jacob, and James, from the distractions of modern life. And that was the reason why the family moved from the city to a remote farm in Beach City, Ohio, where they could instill their strict Christian values away from the temptations of society. In the Stockdale household, discipline was key. Kathy, a strict mother, ran the house with an iron fist, setting rules that the children had to follow. Breaking the rules meant punishment, while following them led to small rewards, like being allowed to listen to the radio. For Kathy, the focus was on controlling every aspect of their lives, especially their characters and education. "We don't allow any cussing," she once said. "Dating has physical dangers like pregnancy. It's not worth it." And so the family didn't allow the children to date, make friends outside the family, or even listen to much music. Kathy believed in keeping their lives as pure as possible, away from what she considered harmful influences. So the children's world revolved around their family, and one of their only outlets for joy was their music. Kathy and Tim shared a love for bluegrass music, and their children were talented musicians, with Jacob showing exceptional promise. Despite the isolation, the Stockdale children had a unique skill: music. Jacob especially stood out with his talent. By the age of 17, he was already playing the fiddle, and by his teenage years, he had become a master. He even earned the title of Ohio State Grand Fiddle Champion in 2012, which was a major accomplishment for someone his age. This musical talent became the foundation for the family band, which featured Calvin on the banjo, Charles on the mandolin, James on the upright bass, and Jacob on the fiddle. Tim fronted the band on guitar and vocals, while all the boys took turns singing. Their music became a way for them to bond as a family, but it also kept them under the strict watch of their parents. Life on the farm, however, wasn't without its challenges. The boys were kept in a bubble, with little opportunity to experience life outside the family home. They were not allowed to watch TV, play video games, or interact with other children. It was a lonely existence for the 4 brothers, but they were conditioned to believe it was for their own good. In the early 2000s, a reality TV show called Wife Swap started gaining popularity. The premise was simple. 2 families with completely different lifestyles would swap wives for 2 weeks. The show aimed to highlight the diversity of family life in America, using the tension and drama that naturally occurred when families with opposing values were forced to live together. Jacob and his brothers were fascinated by the idea of being on the show. They begged their parents to participate, and in 2008, Kathy and Tim agreed. This decision would set off a chain of events that would eventually lead to tragedy. In April 2008, the Stockdale family's strict way of life was exposed on the reality TV show Wife Swap. This particular episode featured 2 families with drastically different lifestyles. The Stockdales from Ohio were deeply religious and adhered to a rigid set of rules, while the Tonkovics from Illinois were the complete opposite, easygoing and carefree. The Tonkovic family's approach to life was simple: enjoy every moment. Lori Tonkovic would often dance with her kids, bringing home fast food, and give them cash without much thought. In contrast, the Stockdales lived a highly controlled existence. As mentioned before, the Stockdales as children Calvin, Charles, Jacob, and James were kept under tight supervision. They lived on a farm far from the city, isolated from outside influences. Their lives revolved around family chores and music. The boys were allowed few pleasures, and earning small rewards like listening to the radio required them to work hard and follow rules strictly. For example, if they didn't make it to breakfast on time, they were fined 25 cents. The boys also couldn't date, listen to most music, or make friends outside the family. Kathy, their mother, believed these rules were necessary to protect their character and ensure that they were brought up with strong Christian values. When the wife swap producers saw the Stockdales' strict lifestyle, they knew it would make great TV. They paired the family with Tonkovics, whose laid-back approach to life was the total opposite. Lori was shocked by how rigid Kathy's rules were. The Stockdale boys woke up early, followed chores, and were homeschooled without contact with the other children. When Lori tried to show the boys the pleasures of modern life, like cable TV and video games, their reactions were often mixed. Jacob in particular struggled with the idea of watching TV, feeling guilty about the thought of it due to his strict upbringing. Despite the tension during the wife swap episode, the experience didn't seem to change much for the Stockdales. Kathy and Tim were set in their ways, and it was clear that their rules would not easily be swayed. After the show, the family continued to live much the same way. The boys, however, started to grow older and began leaving home. Calvin went to college in Michigan, far from his parents' influence, and Charles moved to Philadelphia for medical school. Interestingly, the boys chose to go as far away as possible, which made people wonder if they were trying to escape their strict upbringing. By 2017, only Jacob, 26, and James, 21, were still living with their parents. Jacob's decision to stay home despite being an adult was puzzling to many. Why didn't he leave and start his own life? It was a question that would later become even more significant after the tragic events that followed. The Stockdale family band continued to play, though it was no longer the full family ensemble. Calvin and Charles had moved on with their own lives, but Jacob, James, and their parents kept the band going. They performed at events across the state, even recording a few albums. The band became somewhat successful in Ohio, but the tensions within the family remained. Jacob's decision to stay home, along with the family's strict way of life, set the stage for what would later unfold in 2017. Jacob's upbringing was far from typical. While his siblings eventually left home to pursue their own paths, Jacob stayed behind. He was in his mid-20s, but he had not ventured far from the family home. This decision to remain with his parents, even as an adult, seemed unusual, especially since his brothers had moved far away to avoid the controlling environment. Was he trapped by the expectations placed on him? Or did he simply not know where else to go? These questions would linger until the events of June 15, 2017, when the calm would shatter into violence. On June 15, 2017, everything changed for the Stockdale family. At around 4:36 a.m., Stark County Police received a 911 call from the Stockdale residence. The call was abruptly cut off, raising immediate concern. Police rushed to the house, where they heard a gunshot as they arrived. Inside, they found Jacob Stockdale, barely alive with a gunshot wound to his head. Nearby, his mother, Kathy, and his younger brother, James, were found dead, victims of a brutal shotgun attack. The scene was horrific. Kathy and James had been killed in a violent explosion of gunfire, their bodies heavily damaged by the shotgun blast. It seemed clear to the police that Jacob had shot and killed his mother and brother before turning the gun on himself in a failed suicide attempt. He was quickly taken to the hospital, where doctors managed to save his life, though his injuries were severe. Jacob had lost sight in one eye and suffered significant brain damage, leading to questions about whether he would ever be able to stand trial. The discovery shocked the community. How would such a tragedy occur in a family that had once been so devoted to their strict, controlled way of life? What had triggered such an extreme and violent act? There were many unanswered questions, but the police had a strong suspicion about the motive. Jacob, now critically injured, was left to face the aftermath of his actions, while the surviving members of the family struggled to comprehend the horror. Calvin, the oldest son, released a statement about his brother James, describing him as the catalyst of family fun, a talented musician who had dreams of a career in entertainment. Both Calvin and Tim, the family patriarch, shared the sadness at losing Kathy and James, but both appeared to avoid directly mentioning Jacob's role in the tragedy. This silence left many wondering about the family's feelings toward the young man who had caused the devastation. Jacob's recovery would take months, and during this time, the question of whether he would face legal consequences for the murders lingered. Police decided to delay charging him, waiting for him to recover enough to stand trial. The uncertainty about Jacob's future would continue for over a year, leaving everyone involved in the case wondering what would happen next. After Jacob Stockdale was charged with the murders of his mother and brother in September 2018, the legal process began, though it was far from straightforward. Jacob's defense attorney quickly filed a motion to determine his mental competency, raising questions about whether Jacob was fit to stand trial. This motion ultimately led to a series of mental health evaluations and the prolonged stay at a mental institution. Jacob pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and as part of his plea, he was sent to Heartland Behavioral Health Hospital for evaluation. Doctors at the hospital conducted various tests to determine his mental state. They held mock trials and used legal terminology to assess whether Jacob understood how the court system worked and if he could comprehend the severity of his actions. Jacob spent over a year at Heartland, enduring multiple assessments as doctors tried to piece together his mental state. During his time at the mental health facility, Jacob's behavior raised more concerns. In November 2019, he attempted to escape by hiding behind a stack of books, hoping to sneak past staff who were transporting books in and out of the facility. His plan failed, and he was caught before he could make it out. Just a month later, Jacob tried again. This time, he attempted to blend in with a group of people leaving the facility. But once again, he was quickly discovered and apprehended. These escape attempts suggested that Jacob had enough mental clarity to understand his actions and the consequences, which played a role in the court's eventual decision about his competency to stand trial. While his attempts to flee highlighted his desire to escape his situation, they also indicated that he was not completely detached from reality, raising further questions about his true mental state. Jacob's court proceedings were delayed multiple times due to the pandemic, adding to the uncertainty surrounding the case. It wasn't until September 2020 that Jacob appeared in court, albeit through a video link. This hearing was particularly strange, as Jacob refused to respond when the judge addressed him. His silence could have been due to his unfamiliarity with technology, having never used a computer before, or it could have been a deliberate attempt to reinforce his insanity plea. His refusal to engage with the court did not help his case, and the judge noted his lack of response as troubling. Speaking of which, Jacob's mental health became a focal point in the legal process. A psychologist was eventually called in to evaluate him, and by December 2020, Jacob was deemed fit to stand trial. However, the long delays in the case, combined with his mental state and his family's plea for leniency, created a complicated and drawn-out process. During the wait for the trial to begin, the Stockdale family, despite the devastating losses they had endured, continued to express their support for Jacob. Despite the murders of Kathy and James, the family was reluctant to speak ill of Jacob. In fact, they asked the judge for a lenient sentence if Jacob were convicted, which showcased their strong commitment to their Christian values. The Stockdales seemed to hold on to the hope that Jacob could be forgiven, despite the horror of his actions. Finally, on April 28, 2021, nearly 4 years after the murders, Jacob Stockdale pleaded guilty to both murders. This unexpected move came after years of legal back and forth and mental health evaluations. The plea brought some closure to the case, though it left many questions unanswered, especially regarding the motive behind his actions. The guilty plea meant that Jacob would be sentenced, but the family's plea for leniency had an impact on the judge's decision. They had asked for a reduced sentence, showing their forgiveness and compassion for Jacob, in line with their Christian belief. This request for a lighter sentence appeared to be granted, as the judge sentenced Jacob to 15 years for each murder charge. which was a surprisingly short sentence for such a brutal crime. The judge also decided that Jacob would be eligible for parole in 2048, meaning that at the age of 56, he could potentially be released from prison. The Stockdale family's forgiveness, despite the violence Jacob had committed, seemed to play a large part in the court's decision. Their commitment to their faith appeared to be a driving force behind their willingness to forgive Jacob and support him in any way they could. It's possible that the family saw his actions as a result of an unstable mind rather than pure malice, and they hoped for his eventual rehabilitation. Despite the family's forgiveness, the question of what led Jacob to commit such an atrocious act remains a mystery. The lack of a clear motive leaves many to speculate about the deep underlying issues Jacob faced during his upbringing. Could the pressure of his strict and isolated life have led to this tragic outburst? Or was there something more that triggered the violent act? And so, just like many of such cases, many theories have emerged. There are several theories about why Jacob Stockdale killed his mother and brother. One possibility is that his mother, Kathy, may have suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD for short. Her extreme control over her children's routines and the strict rules she imposed could be signs of this. Kathy was very particular about everything, including the food her children ate. She never allowed them to eat anywhere that wasn't prepared by her. Even when they went out, she packed their meals herself. This kind of control might have contributed to Jacob's eventual breakdown. Some psychologists believe that Jacob might have inherited his mother's possible OCD. His life of isolation and constant supervision might have worsened whatever mental struggles he already had. Kathy's strict, no-fun approach to life was another contributing factor. She saw leisure and enjoyment as sinful, and every day was about work and productivity. This left Jacob with little freedom to form his own identity. He was entirely dependent on his mother to dictate how he lived his life. When it comes to Jacob's motive, there are two main theories. The first is that Jacob simply snapped. After years of feeling controlled and possibly mistreated, he might have wanted revenge. His mother's oppressive behavior could have driven him to a breaking point. The second possibility is that Jacob didn't want his younger brother James to suffer in the same way he had. If Jacob was trying to escape his mother's control, he may have seen killing James as a way to protect him from the same fate. No one knows for sure what Jacob was thinking that day. One thing is certain. His transformation from a seemingly normal young man into a cold-blooded killer shocked everyone who knew him. In a video posted on Kathy's official YouTube channel, Jacob and James perform a song together. The song is about the fear of growing up, and James even asks if there is another option. In the video, the brothers look happy, and there's no sign of the tragedy that would soon unfold. This heartbreaking clip, uploaded just 3 months before the murders, shows the bond the brothers shared, making the violence that followed even harder to understand. The last video shared on the channel captures a moment of happiness between the brothers, leaving many to wonder if love, rather than hatred, drove Jacob to pull the trigger. The complexity of his actions and the lack of a clear motive continue to haunt those who followed this tragic case. Would Jacob have turned violent if his life had been different? Theories abound, but the true reason behind the killings remains a mystery. The case of Jacob Stockdale remains a tragic reminder of how deeply family dynamics and personal struggles can impact a person's actions. While the Stockdale family has chosen to forgive Jacob, the mystery of what truly drove him to kill his mother and brother, and the extent to which his upbringing played a role in his actions, continues to linger. Which of these theories do you think might be true? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this episode. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with our next in-depth investigations on Real Crime Zone. See you in our next video.